Hi, fifth grade teachers. This is Desiree, and you've set aside some time to calibrate the writing performance tasks that your students recently took. So let's go ahead and get started with that. The goals for this time now are that you will access the tools to calibrate together, that you'll become familiar with the anchor papers for this task, that you will have some time to check how closely when you score you are aligned to SBAC's scoring on their rubric, and that you have some time with your colleagues to calibrate one piece of student work together. So you are going to need for this time together your own laptop. This is an independent time, so it's not time to share laptop screens. You'll be doing a lot of reading digitally. You'll need in front of you, and I hope you have a copy of the SBAC narrative rubric printed out. You'll also need a piece of paper to write down scores when we get to that portion and something to write with. So please try to make sure everyone has those 3 items with them. The first item you're going to get familiar with is the calibration guide. That has the item stem, the task students were asked to write to, the 3 SBAC rubrics, a conventions chart that reminds us of the expectations for 5th grade convention related to the language standards, a new document, the condition codes, what happens when a student does not at all write to the prompt, and targets information, a bit of information about how assessments align to targets, align to standards, so we can understand better how that summative assessment in the spring relates to the standards and targets that you're teaching to. So I'm going to go into the local and state assessment site. I think you're already here, or you wouldn't be watching this video. At the left is the 16-17 interim assessment pages, and I'm going to scroll down to 5th grade, click on that page, and here I'll need to do, again, some scrolling. First are the items for the performance task itself, then for math, and underneath math, the calibration material. I hope you've already printed out the SBAC narrative rubric. Item number 1 is what I'm going to ask you to open up first. So will you please click on the Grade 5 Wales Narrative Training Guide and have that open. In a minute, I'm going to ask you to read that performance task, closely examine those rubrics, and also the conventions chart to review 5th grade expectation. Try to finish this in 10 to 15 minutes. So go ahead and pause the video and do that now. Thank you, teachers. So let's come back together and highlight just a bit of what you read. You saw that there are 3 scoring traits that SBAC has on their own rubrics. One for organization and purpose, another for development and elaboration, and the last for conventions. Now, when we think of conventions, we don't want to count every single error a student produces, but we want to hold in mind variety, severity, and density. Variety of error are the students making spelling errors, grammar errors, and punctuation errors. That would be variety. If it's spelling errors repeated over and over, that's not considered variety of error. Severity, what type of error is the student making? Is this 5th grader making errors that a 1st grader should have under control? Those would be severe errors. If this 5th grader is attempting to use sophisticated language and misspelling words that are not in the control of most 5th graders, those would not be considered severe errors. And density. Does the composition have 10% that has error? That would not be dense. 70% that has error would be dense error. And for the second rubric, let's think about what you read of how SBAC defines elaboration. They think of it as the process of developing the setting, character, events, and ideas by carefully selecting and putting in details smoothly into the narrative flow that enrich those ideas. They mention 3 Ds: details, description, dialogue. And I hope you noticed this line on that page as well. Use of sources is to be loosely interpretive in narrative writing to sources. So we are not expecting students to lift entire lines from those sources. We are not expecting those sources to be quoted in any way. In narrative writing to sources, it is a loose interpretation. They used those sources somehow in their composition. So now there is some time for you to practice with an anchor set. You will find exemplar papers that have been written to this particular task. In a minute, I'm going to ask you to read them to understand how do these samples and the SBAC rubrics align themselves. So on the literacy site, item 2 is the grade 5 Wales narrative anchor set. Please open that document now and take 15 to 20 minutes to independently read to understand how the papers and rubrics align. Go ahead and pause the video now. Thank you for doing that thinking, teachers. And to remind you, this chart shows the items that SBAC has released as far as exemplars for writing performance tasks as of now. The black items we had last year and the blue are new so far this year, and I'm continuing to hunt down and look for and hold on to a collection of these samples. So the samples you read are newly released this year, and they were the task given to your 5th grade students. Sometimes you will have anchors that directly align to your grade level and the task they took, and sometimes we won't have samples that directly align to the task your students took. So yay, this year you did for narrative have specific exemplars for that specific task. Now there's again some time for you to practice. You already read through the exemplar set. Now there's a check set, a bit of unscored work that I'm going to ask you to practice scoring with the 3 rubrics. And after you've scored them, there is an answer key so that you can check how closely your scores align to SBAC scores. So I'm going to head back to the local and state assessment site. Item number 3 is the narrative check set. That's the document I'm going to ask you to open first and work through scoring those samples on all 3 rubrics. After you've practiced scoring, open item 4, the scoring key, and there you'll find how SBAC scored those papers. Please try to finish that task in about 20 to 25 minutes. Go ahead and pause the video now. Thank you, teachers. I just want to remind you that scoring is very different than grading. Grading is a teacher's evaluation of a student's progress across an entire period of time, be it half a trimester for progress reports or a full trimester for the trimester grade. It's an evaluation of all that that student has done in that particular area. Scoring is not grading. Scoring is taking one sample, reading it carefully, gathering evidence from that sample, and placing the evidence along the rubric of where it most closely matches to determine a score. It's one slice of that student's ability, not a picture of everything that student can do in that area. And you noticed from the scoring guides that each dimension is characterized by a variety of descriptors. A2 has more than one bullet. So while this is not a completely holistic process, it is not an item-by-item process either. And because there's a limited number of points, only 4 on this scale, each score really represents a range. There's high 2s and low 2s, but we don't want a 999 point rubric. So hopefully this practice is helping us to better understand where those cut points are, what SBAC considers the difference between a 2 and a 3. And when we're looking for that difference, knowing that not all the descriptors are going to fit a score point, let's talk about what SBAC would like us to look for. They are asking that we look for a preponderance of evidence, not an average. I don't have to circle every item on the rubric under a 2 to give a student a 2. They might have a couple qualities that closely match the 3, and maybe one that matches a 4. SBAC is asking us to look for where does the preponderance of evidence for this dimension lie on this rubric. We are not circling bullets on a rubric. We are not dividing up and averaging to find where the student lies. We are looking for the preponderance of evidence for that trait. If your group has a bit of time left, I am going to highly recommend that you calibrate at least 1 to 3 samples at random from the ones that your students wrote to on Illuminate. And you can work together if you're a large group to display one person's sample through the document camera, through the projector onto a screen in front so that everyone can see and score. If you are a small group, maybe you can huddle around one person's computer and view the writing that way. But it's really important that your grade level is truly calibrated, that you are working with the same lenses, with the same understanding as much as possible about how to interpret these rubrics and how to process students' writing through the lens of these rubrics. So please go ahead and pause the video and do that work together now. Thank you, teachers. I hope that this time was valuable to you in better familiarizing yourself with the 3 rubrics and those traits and expectations for narrative writing to sources. Thank you for working as hard as you are. I know you have a lot going on and a lot of goals that you're trying to reach, and I so appreciate all that you do in service of our students. If you have any questions for me or items to clarify from this process, please feel free to email me at the email address there on the screen. I also wanted to remind you that the literacy site has writing units completely developed for 5th grade in narrative writing, opinion writing, informational writing. And those have checklists for students, conferring forms for teachers, rubrics, student samples, day-by-day lesson plans, resource packets, and text sets completely done. I hope that you do take some time to look through that source and take advantage of it. And thank you again for just how much you help each and every student in your classroom progress in their writing ability. Happy writing.